Thank you everybody who is joining us today. I'm Scott Woods with Hawk Ridge Systems, the product manager for our technical communication suite, and that includes Composer, inspection, model-based definitions, and also visualize, and that's our rendering package. And so this is all about Composer today, and it's part 3, and it's I'm not sure how many parts are going to be in this series. It's just however many we need. I haven't really figured that part out yet, but there is 2 more parts to this series if you haven't seen them yet, and those are the very first one is it's a video and also accompanied by a couple blogs. So if you go to our website and you go to basically it's hawkridgesys.com, and up in the top right you'll see an area that says blog. Click on that, and then you can search the blogs. There's some options on the right to search by product, search by composer. It's currently the 2 most recent, depending on when you're watching or recording this right now, but it's the 2 most recent blogs on there, and they're called Pro Tips. They're both Pro Tips, the correct way to import any CAD model, and that's part 1 and 2. So that goes in detail of how to actually get your SOLIDWORKS or whatever CAD model type it is into Composer the correct way. And there's also a recording of that on YouTube. So you have a video and 2 blogs. And then we have, that's the video there. And then we also have a second recorded video that isn't on our YouTube channel yet. It should be within the next day or 2. It's just going through the final touches, and it goes through how to actually prep your model for asset generation. So it's the in-between of, we've brought the models in the correct way, and then today we're going to be going more into tips and tricks and neutral properties, and this video here kind of covers everything in between the 2. So what we're doing in this series is we're just breaking down Composer to the basics, and we're slowly building it up to the more advanced stuff. So every one of these presentations are going to be a little bit more advanced and just give you guys everything you need to be, productive with the software and create that best content possible. Okay, so today's agenda is first I want to show some navigation tricks and selection tricks, and these are pretty basic, you would think, but they're one of those things that if you don't know about them, you're not working as efficiently as you can. And then once you do know about them, it's just one of those things that's like, wow, this makes life so much easier. And there's a few little caveats that I'll point out. So let's go ahead and show that, and then after that I'm going to jump into neutral properties. And neutral properties is a big topic. That's going to take most of today, but if you're going to take anything away from probably this whole series is neutral properties. So this is one of the most important presentations of the series, that, in my opinion, because the neutral properties in Composer is the backbone of the software. It's what sets it apart from any other software out there that's even available, and it makes the software as efficient and creates that really stunning content. And if you don't understand neutral properties, it's really hard to be efficient with the software. So we're going to cover that in detail today, in more detail than we've ever covered before, except for our training class. And if you've taken our training class, this is a bit of a reminder, but also additional kind of learning on top of that. So we're going to go in more detail than we even do in that class. So and then we'll show some other tricks, tips and tricks, and get into assembling, and then also a little peek into the 2D authoring elements, which is going to be the next presentation we give. Okay, so let's jump into Composer, and right, sorry about that, right here, and let's go to just how to navigate the model. So we've imported it. There's some tips and tricks from that past presentation we did a couple weeks ago, which is going to be on YouTube here pretty soon. But just simple things like how to rotate. So if you take the middle mouse button and you click out, if you're not on the model, you click out here in space. If I click and hold the middle mouse button, I'm going to rotate the model around its origin, or kind of around the environment's origin. Okay, and you have some pretty precise controls over rotating it, but let's say I wanted to like tilt it to the side. I'm not really getting that option. No matter where I move my mouse, I'm not actually rotating it how I would like right now. By the way, this is a little scale model of the Space Needle, one of those sheet metal kind of like kits you get and you put it together, so a little assembly of that. I'm from Seattle, so I thought this was fitting here. But it was just the model we're working on today. So that's outside the model, and that's just the click into space with the middle mouse button and dragging around. Now if you take your mouse and you put it on the model and you do the same thing, now you're rotating along that point that you've actually selected on the model. So something as easy as that, something as, clicking away off the model or clicking on the model is going to give you two distinct ways of rotating. Now, if I hold down Control and I click off the model, I get a pan. If I click on the model, I get a pan too. But the Control button now switches it from rotate to pan, so you can kind of like set it side to side. If I hold down Alt, then I can get a tipping. Now, this is the default settings in Composer, so if you go to File, Preferences, Navigation, and you click Reset, all the controls I'm showing you right now are the default out of the box. If you've gone through and adjusted these settings, the controls I'm showing you right now probably won't be exactly. So if you're struggling with that and you're like, they're not doing exactly what you're saying, just hit reset and it should be exactly what I'm showing here. Okay, so again, Alt, that does this tilt. So, and if you click the model, it does the same thing, but tilts on the point. So if I wanted to have it at like an angle, I can kind of rotate it like this, click over here, hold down Alt, kind of tilt it, let go of Alt, and then rotate it some more. So just, if you know these little tips and tricks, it just makes it so you can get that exact angle you're looking for. Now for zooming, and of course once you get like all the different kinds of ways to rotate, all the different kinds of ways to zoom, and then you combine them together, and after a while it becomes just second nature. You can get those real precise angles you're looking for. But the middle mouse button for zoom zooms into the model. It zooms into wherever your mouse cursor is out on the screen. So if my mouse cursor is over here out in space, I'm going to zoom out in space. If it's on the model, I'm going to zoom toward the model. So again, this little tip there to show you exactly how to get to going exactly where you want. Now if I click a large model, like this disk here, that's a large model of this assembly, and if I double click that, it's going to zoom out and also change the perspective of the camera to that model. Now it's a large one, so I kind of have the whole thing. Now if I double click in space, I get the whole model. So that's a large part in the model, and this is the entire model. I'm just double clicking the mouse, left click. Now if I double click a smaller component, watch what happens. The camera perspective is going to kind of zoom out. It's going to change perspective to that model, to that part, and it's going to zoom into that specific component. Now this really lets us add like, more dramatic feel to the end rendering if perspective is turned on. So right now my perspective is turned on down here in the bottom right, so I kind of have that real perspective look to the model. If I didn't want that, if I wanted more like orthographic projections, I just disable that, and it's still going to zoom into the model. There's that part, or the larger part, here's the smaller part. You're still going to get that. You're just not going to get that dramatic look like this. So it really depends on how you want your end product to look. And so really, from just these real basic controls, we can get any angle that we want. If I wanted to, kind of like rotate the model so I can kind of see the back side, maybe double click this guy so I can zoom in. And now if I hold down Alt, you kind of see it's tilted right now. So if I hold down Alt, I kind of like adjust that tilt, and then I can, let go of Alt, rotate, and get something like this. And now I get this like perspective view of the disk of the Space Needle. Now, the very last navigational tool I want to talk about is the fly-through mode. So you'll see up here, it's the Home tab, and it looks like a little airplane. So I select that, and this changes the way that the camera zooms. So let me hit Escape deselect the airplane. Now if I wanted to, let's say I wanted to get inside, I think this is like the restaurant area of the Space Needle here, or maybe that's up here. Yeah, I think this is like the gift shop area and then restaurant. So let's say we wanted to go inside the restaurant. So if I just zoomed my mouse, so right now I'm taking the middle mouse wheel and I'm rolling it toward me to zoom in, I'm not actually putting the camera inside the Space Needle. I'm actually zooming from like a distance. So if you think about this, it's like a helicopter flying outside of the building, and I'm taking a telescopic lens and I'm zooming into different parts of the model. So if there's models that are between me and where I want the camera to be, they're going to get in the way. So that is just the regular zoom on the mouse like this. If you now select the fly-through mode, it actually changes the camera. So it moves the camera toward the model, not just zooming into the model, which is like the helicopter now flying, maybe it's a drone, flying into the Space Needle and then taking pictures of the inside. And so now by using this, let's go to the kind of lobby area here. But now all I'm doing is I'm taking the airplane tool and I'm holding down the left mouse button. So left mouse button is zoom in, right mouse button is zoom out. But I'm taking this camera and I'm actually flying into the interior of the Space Needle. Now if I take the middle mouse button and I click it on a point, like maybe on the floor here, I can use that point to rotate and look around. I'm not doing a great job here, but let me go ahead and try to show. Anyway, so if I wanted to do something like this, maybe zoom in, take the airplane tool. Again, it's very sensitive. It's one of those things that it's just for getting this nice interior shots or something like that. And then we can actually take the model and move it in. So anyways, just one of those little tricks there. It's really good for creating fly-throughs and things like that. Okay, so back to the PowerPoint here, just so we can stay on track, is that's just kind of navigation and selection tricks. And there's a few more too. Those are just the real common ones and ones that you just really need to know to be efficient in the software. Then after that, we get into the neutral properties. Now, the neutral properties, this is something that it takes a level of understanding of Composer to really understand why we would even have neutral properties. So if you're brand new to Composer, you've never heard about it, you know, there are some videos, like I was saying, the first two that are in this series that you probably want to watch before you get to this level. And then also there's a bunch of other videos for Composer on a YouTube page. It really explains what the software is and what it does. If you are a Composer user currently who's been using it for years or has just adopted it, this would make a little bit more sense to you. Where the CAD model has properties and Composer has properties once you import that model into Composer. And Composer can either reference the properties of this component of the CAD model, or they can adjust and manipulate those properties. So let's say, just to break this down, and we'll show this visually, so it's a little bit, you know, it depends on what kind of person you are, if you understand things more of like textbook-wise or visually, and we'll show it both ways here. So if you think about the CAD model, and regardless if this is a SOLIDWORKS model, it's a step model, it's an IGES model, whatever it is, it's a 3D CAD model. With SOLIDWORKS, you're going to have more properties like meta properties that we have control over. So with a SOLIDWORKS model, you're going to get the most options here. But that model controls several things. It controls if it is a SOLIDWORKS part or assembly or both. It has custom properties, so metadata in that model. So that's going to be when you're in SOLIDWORKS and you go to File, Properties, and you say, hey, this material is aluminum, it was last modified on this date, it's this current rev, this is the BOM ID, this is the vendor part number, whatever data you want to put into that custom property, that's metadata and that's controlled by the SOLIDWORKS CAD model. Then we get into color. So this could be on the part level, the assembly level, surface of a part, you know, so you could have different surfaces of the part, different colors, anything like that. So this coloring is controlled by the CAD model. And so if you change the color of the CAD model, that is what it's going to import into Composer. It's going to be that color. Location, and so all parts, all assemblies, the location of where they're at in space, and if you like XYZ coordinates of this part is here, it's at this rotation, whatnot, all that is driven by the CAD data, the CAD model. And then of course shape, that's the big one. By shape, I mean the design. So you modeled a screw, right? That's the shape. It has a, it's a Phillips head screw, and it has a certain thread pattern to it. Who knows? That's the model. Now that is 100% driven by the CAD model. Composer cannot touch that. It can stretch and pull, and you can distort it, but you can't change the design, the shape. So what I'm referring to as shape. So now once you get the model from CAD, from SOLIDWORKS, into Composer, you can have Composer completely 100% reference all properties from CAD. So if you import the model into Composer, and then you just create some views, you change the camera rotation, you look at different positions of it, and you're done, that model is, that Composer document is 100% referencing the CAD model. If you go back into SOLIDWORKS and you change any of those metadata, you change the coloring, you change the shape, I should have called that geometry, but you change the shape or geometry of the model, or the location of the part, like you take a wheel of a car and you pull it off, and you go back to Composer, you update it, all of those changes you did in SOLIDWORKS will then be affected in Composer. You'll see those changes. But now Composer has the option of overwriting any property per view in Composer. So in Composer you can have as many views as you want. Each one of those views have full control over all the properties for all the parts and assemblies that are in the Composer document, and that's per view. So that's going to be properties like BOM IDs. So BOM IDs in Composer is a property. We can change that per view. There's locations, so you take these models, you explode them apart, you move them wherever you want them to go. That's also now a custom property in Composer driven by each view. So if you create an exploded view in Composer, and you go back into SOLIDWORKS, and one of those parts that moved in that exploded view, you move it in SOLIDWORKS to a different location, you go back to Composer, Composer is still controlling where you put it in the exploded view. So that no longer is being driven by SOLIDWORKS. However, if you didn't move that part in Composer in a view, or any views that didn't move that part, it's going to reference the new location now that's in SOLIDWORKS, saying, oh, well, it actually belongs over here now, and it's going to move in Composer. So Composer can use those properties from SOLIDWORKS, overwrite them completely. Now, color, so location and color are both properties in Composer. And so if you make a part red in SOLIDWORKS, but in Composer you told it to be green, and that's now being driven by a view, by a custom view, that is going to remain green in Composer. But Composer knows that, let's say in SOLIDWORKS you made it red, Composer knows it's supposed to be red, but it's overwriting it to green. So at any given time you can say, hey, actually reference whatever's in SOLIDWORKS and make it red, and it's going to know that. And that's one of the things I think is better to show, which we'll show here today. Shape is not a property. There's no properties in Composer to control shape except for to stretch the geometry. So that screw, you could stretch it in any direction, but you're not going to change the geometry like the way that it was modeled. That's all done in the CAD tool. And so any geometry changes done in CAD will update in Composer. Besides that whole stretch thing, just throws a little monkey wrench into it. But let's just pretend that's not here right now. Like, that's not an option. Where shape is not driven by Composer, that's driven by CAD. Okay. So with that explanation, we go back to Composer. And let's just go here, and sorry, it doesn't want to pop open. There it goes. Okay, so now we're in Composer. We have one view. We really haven't done anything to this entire model yet. So let's go ahead and let's create a view. So let's say that, let's say we take, and we'll make some changes here. I'm going to go ahead and create, I'm just zoomed into this area. I'm going to go ahead and create another step, another view. And then let's say that this component, just this one part that I have selected here, let's say it is blue. And then let's say that we take a couple other components and we're going to pull them out from the model. And we'll just do something like that. We'll just kind of grab them, just kind of like drag them up, or maybe off to the side or something like that. I just want to make a change. I just want to move these parts somewhere. Let's do something like this. I'll just grab it, move it. By the way, toward the end here, I'm going to go over different ways of exploding and moving objects, which is a little bit better than I'm showing right now. So just keep that in mind. We all are going to get to that point. Okay, so now I've taken models, I've moved them away from the part, I've changed the color of a component. Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say, create a view. I'm going to create a view. You know what, I'm also going to take another part, I'm going to make it green, and I'm going to update that view. So you see if I don't update the view, that part is not going to retain the green color, but if you kind of see it right here in the preview, it's very small. But if I hit update, now that part is green there. If I go back to this view or this step, those parts go back to where they belong. These components all went back to that gray color. I go here, you'll see these parts moved, these parts changed color. That is a custom property change in Composer for just this view. Just this view cares about that. The other views have no idea that change ever happened. Now because it's a custom view and this view is controlling the location and the coloring, that no matter what we do in SOLIDWORKS, these parts in Composer will still be green, still be blue, and these parts will still be in this location. Okay, so let's go ahead and go into SOLIDWORKS and make an adjustment. With that said, I'm just going to go ahead and save this. We'll call it mod, because we've made changes. Okay, something like that. Now I'm going to go into SOLIDWORKS, and I just want to make sure I have the right, yep, just want to have the right model open. Okay, so now you see we're in SOLIDWORKS, so we're no longer in Composer, so we're actually able to modify the properties of this model, that neutral properties are in Composer. So if I randomly take one of these, let's say this guy here, let's go and open it up, and I just want to change the color to, let's say, red. So I'm just going to make this part red. We're going to accept it, close it, save it, and now we have like this umbrella pattern on the top of the Space Needle, so something like that. And maybe that's all the change I want to make. So I'm going to go ahead and save the model. Let's go ahead and close it. I'm going to go back to Composer, and I'm going to do a file update. So now I have this copy, just this modified version of the Space Needle. I'm going to update from that. It's going to take about a minute here for the update process to work, to finish its job. What it's doing is it's bringing in that CAD geometry into Composer, and it's comparing every single part in Composer to every single part in SOLIDWORKS. It's all based off a name. That's how it works. So the SOLIDWORKS assembly has a name. Every one of its components have a name. Those names correspond to the names in Composer and matches them up one-to-one, and then it makes the adjustments needed. And so now we look at this, and so you'll see the neutral property of that part change to red, right, from SOLIDWORKS. So if I go back to the very first view, it's red, so it's that red-white pattern. I go to this guy, it's that red-white pattern. I go to this guy, this one has the custom properties. So I randomly selected two parts and moved them out. I just happened to select a white one and a red one, just by luck here. And so these two parts, right, the coloring of this is being driven by SOLIDWORKS, told to be red, but the location, even though SOLIDWORKS is saying that these parts belong here, are over here because this view is controlling that, forcing that movement change to be here. It's also forcing this part to be green and this part to be blue. Now SOLIDWORKS is saying this part is blue, but SOLIDWORKS is saying this part is red, the Composer is saying this part is blue. But I can select the part, I can select the color, and there's a little button here that says Restore Neutral Property. So what that does is it says whatever color this is supposed to be in SOLIDWORKS, make that color in Composer. So if I click it, it goes red. If I click the green one and I do the same thing, I have green selected, I hit Restore, it's going to go white. Because that property was only being driven in this view,
but it knows what it's actually supposed to be, and you can reference that. So using that, and I'm just going to create a new view here. I'm not going to update this view. I'm just going to, that way I can go back and forth between the two. And I can say this one, these color changes, and even these parts, if I click the parts and I say restore neutral position up here in the transform tab, it's going to go back to where they belong. Let's create a third view of that, something like that. So now we have three identical views, but one is completely driven off of SOLIDWORKS for the neutral properties. One is saying everything is driven by the neutral property except for the location of these two parts. And one is saying these two parts location, these two parts coloring are custom properties of this view. Now this is where it gets a little tricky, right? Because I can say, well, this part, the green color, is the neutral properties of this document. And if I click this and I say this is the neutral property, that little button, and then I go to another view, you'll see that part is green. Let me just hit the little refresh here to refresh our previews. Now that part is green in every single view, because every single view is saying to reference the neutral property coloring of this part, and we just forced that neutral property change in the Composer document to be green, even though SOLIDWORKS is saying it to be white. If I did another update, just file update from SOLIDWORKS, it will, every part in this document that is green will turn back white because SOLIDWORKS is forcing it to be white. We just, for this instance in Composer, told it that it was green, and we forced that change. This is kind of one of those tricky properties you really don't want to mess with unless you know what you're doing. Because if I, like said, this red part, let's say this red part here, I say it's going to be this light blue color, and then I say that is the neutral property. I'll force that for the entire document. And so any place that part is in Composer, in any view, it's going to be that color. But you have to be careful, because if I now update from SOLIDWORKS, any blue part in this document is going to turn back to red because it's going to overwrite that property. So if I want this property to retain, I create what's called a baseline property view. And if you have taken our class, our Composer class, we explain that in detail. And I'll explain that in detail here pretty soon as well. So that's how we retain that. And actually, I think that is our next topic here. Let me just verify that. Oop, go back to the agenda. Yep, and so we're going to do the baseline property view. So that is, in a nutshell, what neutral properties are all about. It's all about saying I want to reference the neutral property of the item from the CAD model, or I want to overwrite that property in Composer. Some properties can be overwritten, some cannot. And Composer will tell you exactly what or what cannot be overwritten. If I select any component, let's click this green part for example, and I look at this list here. This is the property list. Anything in this list can be overwritten for this particular view. These are all property changes that can be made for this view, and you'll see that in here there's a scale under geometry. And so scaling, I can go ahead and I can just for example here, I can make that real thick here. I can change that, the scaling. The scaling is the only geometry change you can do in Composer that we can control the properties for. Everything else, like if I cut a hole in this part with SOLIDWORKS and I updated it here, that hole will retain, and there's nothing I can do in Composer to remove that hole. I can hide it, I can put a plane over or something like that, and I can make it look like it's not there, but it still is going to be there in the geometry. So you look through this list and you'll know exactly what changes can or cannot be made. Also, you look at user properties, you'll see that there's a name, a configuration, there's an instance name. It's basically the same, it's just how many parts there are in the document for that particular component. But if I went into SOLIDWORKS and I added, revision and who the engineer was and what material it is, this will all populate with that data. And so we could overwrite that data per view in Composer, because it is a property, but when you update from Composer, it's going to use whatever data is in, when you update from SOLIDWORKS, it's going to use whatever data is in SOLIDWORKS. So it's a much better idea to not add the metadata in Composer, but to go back to SOLIDWORKS, add it there. That way, anytime in the future when you update, it's going to pull that data in and you don't have to
redo it. Okay, now we get into a situation where we have companies that, the people using Composer, they don't use SOLIDWORKS at all, or maybe the company doesn't use SOLIDWORKS at all. Maybe they receive SOLIDWORKS models and they only use Composer, so they don't have access to that. Or there's different locations, and one location is engineering, and another location is tech pubs, and there's no solid communication between the two, and there's no, hey, can you add some metadata there, or can you change this or that? So that is where the baseline property view comes into play. Now, this is one of those things that it's a bit more advanced, and you might not understand it right now if you're new to the software. But this is just we're recording this, of course. We can come and reflect on it later. And so once it does make sense, you're like, oh, that's what he was talking about. So let me verify, or just kind of explain that real quick here without spending too much time on it. Again, we do teach this in the Composer class. But let's say that we have changes that we want made. Let me go back to this guy here. So this one right here is totally referencing the neutral properties, whatever those neutral properties are. Currently, it's this one and that one are being changed by the Composer document. If I update from SOLIDWORKS right now, they're going to turn back to whatever SOLIDWORKS is telling them to be. So right now, this particular view is referencing neutral properties totally. Now, if I make a clone of this view just by, actually it's whatever is in the current viewport, I just hit this button right here, and that takes a snapshot of what I'm currently looking at, and maybe I call this like baseline or something like that. You can call it whatever you want. We call it baseline property view. That name is irrelevant. You can call it whatever you want. It doesn't matter. It's just a way that you can go back and you can say, hey, this view right here, this is controlling anything special that I want. Let's say this disk here, let's say it is pink. Oh, that's awful. Let's say it's a dark gray. There we go. So that disk is a dark gray. This part here is like this light blue. But then also you'll see in the properties here, I have different things. Like right now it's set to metal. I can set this to like a metal brush and give it more of a brush look to it. Maybe these red components. And we'll check this out. If I go to Home, select by color, and I click all the red, it's going to select all the red components. And I can say, these are actually like a plastic look to it. And they're going to have like this sheen, plasticky look. So something like that. So any property changes I make to this view and I update it, those changes are going to retain. So now when I update from SOLIDWORKS, SOLIDWORKS is going to affect all these other views, but any changes I make in this view are going to stay consistent because I'm physically making the changes as a custom change for this view. Now in practice, you'd want this to probably be like the first or second view of your entire document. Then any other views that you make are based off of this one by cloning it. By cloning it, I mean you take this view, let me go and update it here. So you take this view, you click this guy, you've now cloned that view. So now I have two identical views, but basically all of these views are kind of based off of this one. Now I go through the document and I can make any changes I want. Let's now, like, I don't know, go to this guy and just a quick change. We say, hey, all these parts are green, just so we have a real visual change here. And then okay, I'm sorry, let me back up here. Let's say I go into SOLIDWORKS and I make all the parts green. And then I update the Composer document, and now I have this view that all the parts turn green because that's what SOLIDWORKS told it to do. We're going to pretend like we just updated it. But I have this baseline property view that has these different colors in there, and those are the colors I want, or other things like the plastic appearance or whatever else is in this list. I like those properties, I want to keep them. I've updated from SOLIDWORKS. I have no control over what the engineers are doing in SOLIDWORKS, and so when I go to update Composer, I could get clown coloring, and I can get just really behavior that I didn't want to happen. But I have this baseline property view that's saving me. It's saying, hey, all the changes you made in this view are going to retain no matter what happened in SOLIDWORKS besides geometry update. So now I can go here, I can select, this is after an update, I can select all my components, I can say set as neutral property. I can go back to that view that I don't like how it looks because that's how it updated from SOLIDWORKS. I can restore neutral property, and I can get all those appearances and everything back to the way they were. I didn't select these guys, that's why they're still green. But that is the idea behind the baseline property. It's like a saving location. It's a way to like draw a line in the sand and say, hey, these are all the changes I want to keep. So no matter what happens to the rest of the document, I'm going to use this to update everything. And since I set that as a neutral property, all I have to do is hit the little refresh button, and anything that's referencing that neutral property will automatically update, like this very first view. We go to the very first view and check that out. Now we have this blue color. It has like a metal look to it, and these guys, I guess I didn't change that plastic to be the neutral property, but they would have if I did that. But that gives you an idea of how we can just go ahead and like control an updated document. Okay, so next on the agenda, let's do all the different ways to explode. And there's a few different ways, and this is going to go into more of a navigation or a translation for navigating the parts. And just a few tips before we kind of end it today to give you guys a little bit more oomph out of the presentation. Okay, so now I'm going to get into not only explode but also selection, because selection is a big part of exploding a model. And so if I go and I say like, I go to the Home tab, I go to Select, and I say select by, let's say select by color or select by instance. Let's do instance. So I say instance, and I click on this little guy right there. It's going to select all of them because they're the same instance. So it knows that in the CAD model, this was just pattern, so it's probably a circular pattern. And so it is the same part, it is the same instance, there's just many of them, and I can select them that way. Now if I go to transform, and let's just do like translate, grab these guys, bring them up. I can bring them all up, I can bring them all to the side, whatever I want, right? Let's undo that. Now the transform explode, if I wanted something like this, and if I wanted this to radiate out in a cylindrical pattern, I would choose cylindrical. And this is a cylindrical explode. I go and take the z-axis here, or the y-axis depending on the model, I drag it up, and it's going to take it as if you have this imaginary cylinder, because this is a circular pattern, and all these are attached to that cylinder, and I just increase the diameter of the cylinder, and they all translate out, something like that. All right, let's put a pin in this. I'm going to take this exploded view. I'm just going to create a new step or view here, and I'm going to come back to it in a little bit because I want to do some fun stuff with that. But let's go through some more of the navigations here. If you grab everything and do a spherical explode, this is like putting a grenade in the middle of it, and it just blows everything out. Actually, this model turned out pretty cool. So something like that, right? Back up here. Okay, and then the linear explode, that's more if you're going to go into, actually this might be a good example, this whole chunk right here. And if I translate that out, yeah, something like that. And what it does is it equally spaces all the components out from each other. It uses a set of components or a single component as an anchor. And so if I go into the opposite direction, you'll see that the top components are the anchor. If I go into this part, or if I go up, the bottom ones are the anchor. So it's a way to easily explode components out like that. But what about moving parts easily? So I go back to this component here, this rib or whatever we want to call it, and I select it. And I say translate. I don't have any control over the what they call the gizmo, the like coordinates, the compass of the way that this guy explodes. Right now it actually looks pretty good because it's basing off of the gizmo is based off, or the pivot is based off of the component's origin, or the way that the component was modeled. But maybe this component was modeled by someone who like modeled it in place or didn't really know what they were doing, and they made it at some weird angle, right? And then you click on it here, and instead of being able to translate out like this, you click that and it actually goes at some weird angle, which happens all the time. So how we get around this is there's some automated tools here. You can align pivot with like the world axis. So this is the assembly, but again, this gives you this weird angle, which we don't want for this particular part. If I align with the local axis, which is the component, it probably gives me what I want. It's actually really hard for me to tell right now if that's actually going to translate exactly what I'm looking for. However, I can take all the guesswork out of it, and again, some of those tips, I hardly ever use these guys, because I can go translate, I can click on the part, and if I hold down Alt, any edge, you'll see they light up red, any edge in the entire model I can use to translate this component. So I have this component selected, and if I hit Tab, I can temporarily hide anything. So let me go ahead, I still have it selected, but see how I hit Tab and I can temporarily hide anything like that? So if I click on the model and I hit Tab, I'm going to temporarily hide it. I'm going to hold down Alt and I'm going to select this edge right there. And that's my edge for translation. And you can see that the part's still hidden, but it is moving. You'll see the kind of ghost out there. But I can kind of take that edge, move it out, click, it comes back. Now I know that that part perfectly translated out parallel with that edge in that direction, which gives me exactly what I want. And no matter what model it is, there's usually an edge somewhere in the model that's exactly how you want it, or very, very close. It doesn't help, it doesn't work 100% of the time, but I'd say 99% of the time it works really well. So if I click on this guy and I say translate, hold down Alt, I can say like this edge, and I can go at that angle now of that edge. Or I could say, you know, this edge here, whatever angle that is, I can select it and I can move the model along that edge. I can also do this with rotation. So if I, instead of saying translate, I say rotate, I hold down Alt, I can say rotate along this edge here like a hinge. And these are just great navigational tools for, you know, creating those explode views and getting things to move in the precise angle and location that you want them to move. And they're just little tricks, but once you know all these little tricks on like how to exactly use the mouse in conjunction with keyboard buttons to get your rotation, your zoom exactly how you want it, and you have your part and you want to be able to translate it out exactly how you want it, it just really helps. For instance, if I, let's do another one here. So let's say I take this guy, and I want to translate it up. And this gizmo, this pivot is exactly up, but maybe it wasn't. I could hold down Alt, I could select like this edge here, which I know is a vertical edge, and I can translate this guy, zoom out a little bit more. I can translate it up like that. Now if I said, oh no, I actually meant to select all three of these, and I wanted them to translate up the exact same amount, I could grab all three of them, or the other two remaining, I can say copy transformation. If I mouse over, just hover over this guy, you'll see how they snap into location. I click and they move up. Let me just create a little snapshot of that little new view there. And you'll see that these components moved exactly where I wanted them to move, all together. And now if I wanted these to start spinning on axis, you know, I could say rotate, and now I need to find a circular axis somewhere in, because you see that the pivot is not centered right now of these three parts. It's off to the side. But if I wanted them to spin on axis, I need a circular edge, and I got a circular edge here. So if I go ahead and I control select a circular edge, actually that is not circular. See if I can find one. You can see how this is modeled. This is a sheet metal model, so everything is, I don't know if there's actually any circular edges here. And let me see, I should probably test it, this one. Ooh, this one might be a circular edge. That might have a circular to it. Let's see. It might just be like a half, no it's not. So anyways, I'm looking for something that I don't think exists. Ooh, right here. Again, like I said, there's usually something in the model. I think I found it right on the base there. So let's try that. And if there's nothing in the model, you can make it, which I was about to do and I'll still do. I just want to see if this edge works. Nope, that is definitely not a circular edge. Okay, so we wanted a circular edge here. This is something I wasn't really planning on showing, but we might as well show since we kind of got to this point. So if you go to Geometry tab, there are primitives. And I could say like here's a cylinder. I put that cylinder here, and the cylinder is probably not going to be perfectly centered. I can get it pretty close. A lot of things in Composer. This is not an engineering program. This is, you want it to be close to precise. You want it to be visually appealing. I know that's not perfect, but it's pretty close. But at least now it gives us this nice edge where we can go ahead and select that edge and start rotating this guy like that. So just for instance. And if I go from this view to this view, you can see that rotation of those parts. Okay, so that's the explode and navigation. Now let's get a little bit more into the that neutral properties. We can actually use them for assembly, and this is the reason why it's so important to understand how neutral properties work and to actually utilize them, because they're going to help you further on down the line, not only during update, but actually to utilize those properties while you're actually creating things like assembly instructions or maintenance manuals or whatever it is. By knowing those neutral properties, it's just going to help you out that much more. So if I were to now take this exploded view we did, and I click one of the parts, and I said restore neutral position, it's going to go back to where it came from. Now if I go ahead and I record that, and let's go to the next one, so restore neutral position and record it. So what it's doing is it's taking the position, that neutral property of how it is in SOLIDWORKS, and it's using it for the location. And if I just go through and I start doing that, and I just create all these different views, what I'm doing here, and we just hit play, is I'm creating an animation of these parts going into the model. Something like that. I got 2 that time. But you'll see how easy it is to reference those neutral properties to make movements. Now, another thing we can do is, let's say that we really want to bring attention to these parts as we're moving it, we can utilize the neutral properties for that as well. So if I said, every part in this assembly, I'm just going to go and select it there, every part is like this light gray, right? Every part is this light gray color. It's pretty boring. Let's create a step for that. But this part, the part that I'm moving, I want to bring attention to. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make it red. Now I'm going to go ahead and update that. So the part that's moving is going to be red. So I'll take that part, I'll restore it. It's going to go into location. You'll see that move just like that. And so the part that I'm using is this red. Now if I didn't have everything gray, if everything was the neutral properties, the coloring, I could take this guy, I can now restore that coloring, because I made it red, but I could restore it to be its neutral property, or I could eyedrop tool that coloring, something else here, and then use another part for the next step that's red. That way, every step that you have, the part turns red, and then it moves into location, and then it goes back gray. Another part turns red, moves into location, goes back gray. And by utilizing the neutral properties, we can create this content that just visually doesn't have any questions. People look at it and be like, oh, that's what's happening. You don't really need any text. If something is lighting up and moving to location, and then going back to some neutral color, and then another part's highlighting, and then moving into location. Okay, so we're almost out of time today. The next video is going to go into more of the authoring content, the next presentation, and that's going to be the 2D stuff, like bill of materials and arrows and annotations and notes and exploded lines and all that two-dimensional stuff that has to do with after we actually start assembling the product. So the process, the way that this works, we import the models, we prep them for asset generation, we start putting together and making all of the physical movements, then we add all the 2D elements, and then we publish. And that's the process of Composer that works out really well. And just a real sneak peek into that, we'll see like this part moved into location. Now if I were to, let's say, apply an arrow, that's author, arrow, and apply an arrow to like this edge here. And let's pull that out something like that. And I just want to go ahead and update let's update that view. We'll get into camera angles later too. But we'll see how the arrow will appear with the model and will actually translate with it like that. And so that's kind of the cool 2D authoring content we throw in afterwards just to really spice it up and make it, that kind of next generation technical documentation kind of content. So, okay. Well, that wraps it up for today. And so just kind of recap on what we went through is going through the navigation, kind of different ways to use the mouse, different ways to zoom, different ways to select
going through that neutral property, so that's properties that are driven from SOLIDWORKS or whatever CAD model created the geometry, and then how Composer can control those elements, or you can link back to those to the CAD model to reference that, and it works both ways. Baseline property view, that just captures all your custom properties into a view that you can reference and use over and over again after an update. All the different ways to explode, linear, cylindrical, spherical, and then also the manual method of just taking objects and moving them around within a linear direction, or holding down Alt and choosing an edge in the model for translation or rotation. Using neutral properties for the assembly, so that is referencing those neutral properties to get the components back to where they belong, the right color and all the properties, and you can utilize those properties over and over again to make life a lot easier, so you're not putting anything back, you're just telling it to go back, and then the software does all the work for you. And then a little sneak peek into our next presentation, which is going to be all about that 2D authoring content. Okay, so that was our presentation for today. There are additional learning videos on our YouTube page, and then also on our Hawk Ridge System website. So if you go to hawkridgesys.com/videos, that's going to have all of our videos. If you go onto YouTube and just search Hawk Ridge Sys or Hawk Ridge Systems, all those videos are there too. And you'll also get more content on YouTube that you might not find on the website. And it's kind of all grouped together and easier to find. Webinar Wednesday, the next one is June 21st. It's going to be designing liquid-cooled components with SOLIDWORKS Flow simulation. And then on the 28th, we're going to go into PDM for managing all your legacy data.